Greetings. Father Mark signing on, continuing the series on the Fathers of the Church. We left off last time with the death of Pope Mark, cause unknown, on October 7, 336. Followed as Pope 35 by Saint Julius I, reigned from February 6th, 337 to April 12th, 352. For reasons that have not been preserved in the historical record, there was a 4-month sede vacante, a vacancy, after the death of Pope Mark, such that Pope 35, Julius I, accepted election on February 6th of the following year, 337. Julius was born in Rome. He was a firm supporter of Nicene orthodoxy and of prelates such as Athanasius, who were persecuted for upholding it. Further evidence of diffusion and synthesis between the Church and the imperial legal system post-Nicaea may be found in the reign of Pope Julius I, in which we find the first mention of the office of the primicerius notarium. These are notaries, legal notaries. In the ancient world, notaries were procedural specialists with a training to frame public actions in terms of the proper legal constructs for the purpose of ensuring the possibility of juridical recourse against the vagaries of circumstance and human frailty. So that was the notaries were pre-existing. Like he did not invent that, but there was an office in the secular world. So, but we have documents indicating that Pope Julius added 2 new basilicas to Rome, in the city of Rome, in order to accommodate the growing Christian population post-legalization. These are the churches of Santa Maria in Trastevere and what was called the Julian Basilica, now is the Church of the Holy Apostles. Contracts with architects, builders, etc. were prepared by the office of the new papal notary, the primicerius notariorum, and they were stored in the archives. After Easter Sunday Mass, in the year 337, when the new Basilica of the Holy Apostles was dedicated in Constantinople, the Emperor Constantine became seriously ill, and he sensed that he did not have much time. He went to Drepanum in Bithynia, where his mother had been born. I shouldn't call it Drepanum because he renamed it in her honor, Helenopolis, but he went there. There he confessed his sins. He became, he still had not been baptized, remember. And so on the eve of Pentecost, he finally accepted baptism in a malign circumstance that's going to explain a great deal of what's about to happen. He was baptized by an Arian heretic, none other than the Bishop Eusebius of Nicomedia. He then died, still wearing the white robe of newly baptized, died on Pentecost Sunday, which fell that year on May 22nd, 337. And after his death, we learn that he did it again for reasons that I have that are just incomprehensible. After doing all that he did, remember his father died in 305. 305, and it took him until 324, so almost 20 years. He took fighting to reunite, first to make himself emperor of 1/4 of the empire, then to reunite all the pieces into one. Now, having done all that, in his will, he stipulated that the empire be divided among his 3 surviving sons. These were his three sons by his second wife, whom he boiled alive, Fausta. So in order of birth, the eldest was Constantine II. He was born in 316. He inherited Gaul, Britain, and Spain. So France, England, Spain. He was Nicene Christian in his belief, meaning he believed that Jesus was true God and true man. His next in order of birth was Constantius II, born the next year, 317. He got the whole Greek-speaking East, so what would become the Byzantine Empire. He was Arian in his belief, in his Christology. So he believed in Jesus, but remember, Arians believed that Jesus was neither God nor man. He was special, unique between, so there was the divinity, the one God, then Jesus was the first creation, and then through Jesus, the Holy Spirit and the rest of the creation came into being. So Constantius believed that, instead of that Jesus was both true God and true man. And he had fallen, like his father, had fallen under the influence of his aunt Constantia, who, as we've seen, she became a disciple of the Arians. So Constantius II, in his reign, and he reigned from 337 to 361, he not only permitted persecution of Nicene Christians like Athanasius, but he also financed missionary endeavors by Arian clergy, including outside of the empire. So that is how many Germanic-speaking tribes, the Goths, later the Visigoths, the Ostrogoths, how they were Christian, but Arian Christian, long before they entered the empire. Whereas other German-speaking tribes were still pagan. And it was the same reason that this guy's aunt Constantia, Constantine's half-sister, embraced Arianism, because it's easier for a pagan, a mind formed according to pagan categories, to accept Arianism than Nicene Orthodoxy, because that's the Trinity, and that's just too complicated. Where it's easier to accept, okay, there's just one God, then he created the demigod, then there's the messenger of the gods, and that made more sense to a pagan mind. The youngest of the brothers was Constans, born in 320. He got Italy, Roman Africa, and the Danube provinces, Pannonia, Mysia, and he was Nicene in his belief. He reigned from 340 to 350. This meant that he had to share the western half of the empire with the eldest brother, Constantine II. So, if we were in class at this point, I would ask for a show of hands of anyone who believes that there was any possibility of that lasting. Yeah. So now I'll just assume that no hands were raised, because indeed there was zero possibility of this arrangement lasting. Okay, before it fell apart, in the same year, 337, Athanasius was allowed to return to Alexandria in a general amnesty, celebrating the accession of the three sons of Constantine. Athanasius had always maintained that his exile was unjust, that it was not by right, that he never recognized the canonical right of the Council of Tyre to depose him. While the Arians in Egypt argued that he had been deposed. Pope Julius I offered to judge the case between them. Now, the Arians cared nothing for papal authority. As in Athanasius's absence during his exile, his first exile, second, they already had managed because of the influence of Constantia, and now the Eastern Augustus is one of them, is an Arian. So they managed to infiltrate and have appointed Arians as bishops in Constantinople, Antioch, Caesarea Maritima, the one in the Holy Land, and many other cities. So if they managed to hold on to Alexandria, they had one in Alexandria too, but if they managed to hold on to it, they realized it would be a major victory, after which the next step would be to take the papacy, to have an Arian installed as pope. Now, Athanasius left Alexandria once again and went to the Pope to explain the situation to him. And there, Pope Julius welcomed him, gave him refuge, and what turned out to be 4 years, another exile. During his stay in Rome, Athanasius busied himself preparing a new text of the Bible as a gift for one of the Western emperors, Constans. He was the emperor who had Italy, where Athanasius was then living. And Constans was Nicene in his belief, in his Christology, that Jesus was both true God and true man. This biblical text survives. It was written on antelope skin, and it survives as the Codex Vaticanus. Pope Julius declared that the deposition of Athanasius and other Nicene bishops to have been invalid. He ordered them to be immediately restored. Now, this, of course, was a noble effort, but the Arians had imperial protection in the East. They had no real faith, so they had no fear of papal power. And for them, it was political power. So, here we see yet again the malign result of the way Christianity was legalized, just by personal fiat of the emperor. And another malign consequence of immediately post-legalization, Constantine and future emperors would do it too, taking money from the treasury, taking money from the fisc, the imperial treasury, to build churches. Because then, if it's paid for with public funds, then those churches were seen as government property. So if, as in Constantine's later years, he never became Arian. Well, I guess he was baptized by an Arian bishop. So under the influence of his stepsister, his half-sister, he became an Arian sympathizer. And then certainly under the son who inherited the East, who was a declarative Arian, then who owns those churches? And then so they originally were built for the Nicenes, but now they were built with public funds. So it's the government that decides. Because, public funds, it's the government's property. So remember, taking government, it's when you need money, it's nice to just get a check or just get a bag of gold from the government. But government money always comes with a collar and leash. Always. The year 340. The futility of triumvirate imperial rule became manifest. This is only 3 years after the death of Constantine the Great, when Constans, the youngest of the three sons, successfully arranged the assassination of one of his older brothers, Constantine II, who was the one that controlled, that inherited Britannia, which is Roman England, Gaul, which is Roman France, and Hispania, which is the Iberian Peninsula, Spain. So Constans had his brother Constantine II assassinated in 340, thereby gaining for himself sole rule of the West. Now, he was Nicene in his beliefs, so this did not directly impact the church beyond the sobering failure of a Christian ruler to conduct himself according to Christian principles. Meanwhile, the eastern half of the empire was ruled still by Constantius II, who was an Arian, not just an Arian sympathizer. He was a declarative Arian. He really believed that Arianism was a correct articulation of the divinity, that Jesus was neither God nor man, that he was just a special, unique entity, created, unique between God and man. Same year, 340, another doctor of the church was born, Saint Ambrose. Lived from 340 to 397. He was born in Trevivorum in Roman Gaul. That is, on today's maps, is Trier, Trier, in the Rhineland. His family was Christian, also of the old Roman patrician class of the gens Aurelii. Though Christianity did introduce a rift into the patrician class, between pagan loyalists and Christian converts, in other ways the patrician class perpetuated many similarities. Their education, for example, was along Stoic lines, emphasizing discipline and public service as a duty that is good in itself, something worthy to be pursued. Their education also included bilingual fluency in Latin and Greek, something that was even at this point was disappearing. Like those in the West, apart from people like this who had their own tutors, just didn't learn Greek because Latin is what was spoken in the East, and certainly in the East they wouldn't learn Latin unless they had to. For example, no less an intellect than St. Augustine, who was baptized by this guy Ambrose, but Augustine was of a lower social class. He was not raised with bilingual fluency in Greek. He tells us in the Confessions that he did study it, but he never really got to the point of thinking, being able to think in Greek. Ambrose's father was also named Ambrose, just for the sake of confusion. But in some of the accounts, they'll call the father Ambrosianus, just to distinguish him. His father had entered imperial service, rose to the rank of prefect in Gaul, which was at that point a senior administrative position that was reported directly to the proconsul or governor of the province. His father died in battle in 354 when Ambrose was age 14. Ambrose continued his education. I mean, these are patricians. They were wealthy, so it's not like, where a poor kid loses his father and then be destitute. So Ambrose, his mother, his brother and sister, they all moved to Rome to stay with relatives, and so their education continued. Ambrose's brother was Saint Satyrus, Satyrus, and his sister became Saint Marcellina. In 341, there's Satan plays another game. This is semi-Arianism. So remember, from the demonic perspective, it doesn't really matter what we're fighting about, as long as we're fighting each other. We're not united, and therefore we're not pursuing the purpose of the church, which is to be the visible presence of Christ in history until he comes again. So as long as we're fighting. So we have Arianism that we're fighting about. So now the demonic introduces something else, semi-Arianism, which brings us back to the city of Antioch in Syria in the year 341. The Arians were not able, as it turned out, to rest secure in the East, even though the Eastern Emperor Constantius II was an Arian, because they knew that could change. Either the emperor could change his mind, as the first Constantine had, or maybe, this guy eventually would die and maybe the next emperor would not be Arian. So many Eastern bishops, in addition, were uncomfortable with the Nicene corrective word homoousios, one in being, that the Son was one in being with the Father. So that in addition to those who really were Arian, there were other bishops who were not Arian, but still were uncomfortable with that, one in being. They thought, okay, that just means, what does that mean? So a synod of bishops was held in Antioch in 341, and they sought to craft a new creed that would not only reconcile the Nicenes and the Arians, but would also provide a useful didactic instrument for correcting many other erroneous formulations of Christology and Trinitarian theology. Remember, we still have modalism, we have adoptionism, we have all the different versions of Gnosticism. So these guys thought the compromise term, instead of homoousios, which means one in being with the Father, they used the word homoiousios. So add in the iota, the I in Greek, which means that the Son was of like substance with the Father, or similar being, like being or substance, or similar being or substance with the Father. So this, 341, is the birth of semi-Arianism. And it is an example, as the first of many well-intentioned compromise formulas seeking peace, seeking restoration of harmony, that only ended up in creating a whole new category of error and a whole new constellation of conflicts. So we'll meet these people again. The following year, 342, another doctor of the church was born, Saint Jerome, lived from 342 to 420. He was born Eusebius Hieronymus Sophronius, which means the Reverend Holy Named Sage. Born at a place called Stridonia. The location is still a matter of dispute. It was somewhere in Illyricum, on the or Dalmatia, Illyricum. It refers to Illyrians. That was a tribe conquered by the Romans in the Illyrian Wars from 228 to 227 BC. The region includes, on today's maps, since Yugoslavia no longer exists, it includes the South Slavic states of Slovenia, Serbia, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Croatia, Montenegro, and northeastern Italy. So Stridonia was somewhere in that area. Jerome was raised speaking Latin as his first language, although his name suggests mixed ancestry, because Eusebius is a Greek name. In any case, he did not learn Greek until his adulthood. So Stridonia, at least, was functionally Latin, regardless of what ethnicity it was. 323. Pope Julius I petitioned the two surviving emperors, Constans in the west and Constantius II in the east, to provide safe conducts for everyone, Arian and semi-Arian and Nicene, to gather for another ecumenical council to resolve the Christological dispute with finality, specifically to resolve the confusion by providing precise definitions for the term homoousios, one in being with the Father, or consubstantial with the Father. Both emperors agreed, and Bishop Hosius of Cordova, who was still alive, he had presided at the First Council of Nicaea, and as he was the oldest surviving bishop in the world, he would preside at this council, which was to meet at Sardica, which is present-day Sofia in Bulgaria. It's on the western side of the Black Sea. Pope Julius insisted that Athanasius and other wrongfully deposed Nicene prelates be allowed to participate, at which point the Arians then withdrew from the council in protest, as they did not want to acknowledge the legitimacy of the Nicenes. So this left 90 Western bishops and 80 Eastern bishops. The Arian boycott of the Council of Sardica deprived the council of its original purpose. The whole purpose was restoring unity among all these people. So it is not enumerated as one of the 21 ecumenical councils. Yet it is historically significant in recording another milestone in the development of post-legalization canon law. It generated 20 canons. Canons 3, 4 and 5 codified recognition by Nicene prelates, at least, from both East and West, that a bishop accused of either a crime or accused of heresy, as Athanasius had been, would first be judged by the bishops of his province, rather than having to go all the way to the capital. The Pope would serve as the universal court of appeals from ecclesiastical provinces, which, as we've seen, were coterminous with the imperial provinces. Meanwhile, the Arian bishops who had seceded, were boycotting Sardica, did not all go home. They met separately on their own, and they formed their own council, which formally excommunicated Pope Julius and Bishop Hosius of Cordova, as well as all the bishops from East and West who participated in this Council of Sardica. 3 years later, 346, on October 21st, the Eastern Emperor Constantius II, even though he was Arian, allowed Athanasius to return to Alexandria. This was at the request of Constantius's brother, the Western Emperor Constans. This 346 began a 10-year period in which Athanasius was able to physically reside in his diocese. The product of this stay was a flourishing of the church, of vocations, and of social charity. In terms of patristic writing, it was in this period that Athanasius wrote his famous Life of St. Anthony of the Desert in 347, which we alluded to earlier. He wrote it 1 year after St. Anthony died. It was also in this period that he wrote his Treatise on Virginity, which provides evidence that women were also taking up the flight from the world, participating in the monastic movement, or should we say in the movement of Christian asceticism lived out in a monastic way. Because there are other ways to live out Christian asceticism. Monasticism is one of them. The following year, 347, another doctor of the church is born, St. John Chrysostom, Chrysostom, lived from 347 to 407. He was born in Antioch on the Orontes, present-day Syria. His father was a career soldier in the legions, died when John was very young. His mother, Anthusa, was a devout Christian who reared him in the faith, though in keeping with the custom of the time, he was not baptized until adulthood. John studied rhetoric in Antioch under the famous pagan rhetor Libanius. Libanius recognized John's talents and thought that John would succeed him in taking over the school. And later Libanius denounced Christians for theft in diverting John from that promising career as a rhetor. From this, we can see that even in his earliest years, John Chrysostom demonstrated the command of language, the personal magnetism, and the skill at verbal exposition that earned him his title, Chrysostom. Chrysostom was not his family name. It was like a nickname. It means the golden mouth in Greek. John came under the influence of Bishop Meletius of Antioch, who was the one responsible for the theft of John, which caused Libanius such distress. Meletius is spelled Meletius. John spent 3 years in service to the bishop, at which point he was installed in the order of lector. After his theological education was complete, John's spiritual formation began. For that purpose, he withdrew from the city to live as a hermit. For 4 years, he lived near a famous local hermit. That's from 375 to 379. And then for another 2 years, from 379 to 381, John lived in a cave alone. During this period, John memorized the entire New Testament, provided himself the foundation for his future lifetime of preaching. But that's later, and later in life. So rewinding to 350. Back to 350. The example set by the Western Emperor Constans, the example of murdering his brother using assassins, was not forgotten. When the fighting against border incursions by Sarmatians became interminable, meaning he wasn't winning, Constans then lost the loyalty of his troops. This enabled one of his generals, named Magnentius, to assassinate Constans in the year 350. After his brother Constans was assassinated, that left only one of the brothers still alive, Constantius II, who was the Augustus in the East. Upon the assassination of his brother, Constantius II then invaded the western half of the empire, seeking to reunite it all under his control. He defeated the usurping general Magnentius, then did reunite the empire once again under himself. This made things much worse for Nicene Christians and expanded both the persecution by Arians in positions of influence, thanks to imperial patronage, and brought the Arian missionary efforts into the West. The Emperor Constantius II, an Arian heretic, emerged as the sole emperor of a united Roman Empire. 2 years later, Pope Julius II died on April 12, 352. The cause is not recorded, so presumably he's not considered a martyr, so presumably it was natural causes. The LP, the Liber Pontificalis, tells us that we talked about the two basilicas. The letter, he wrote a letter on behalf of Athanasius, which is historic, but I just summarized that. A lot of the history that I just summarized came from that. Where is it? I'm looking for the ordinations that Julius did. Then he wrote another one. Oh, no, passed it up. No, I can't. I guess I didn't record it. The number of ordinations is what I was looking for. Anyway, Pope Julius was buried on the Via Aurelia in one of the cemeteries at the third milestone outside of Rome. He was followed as Pope 36 by Pope Liberius, who's not considered a saint. Liberius reigned from 352 to 366. So we will pause there, and we will pick up with Liberius next time. So for now, thank you for your attention. This session is adjourned.